Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters, and debunkers. I'd like to share with you this example of the kind of cult-like mentality we deal with when it comes to those who wish to defend their belief that they live on the outside of a globe, and at the same time they assume that they have superior intellect compared to those of us that have investigated the evidence presented to us for this belief and realized that we were indoctrinated into a cult that had us believing in something that is physically impossible and doesn't represent reality in any way. Here we have this video showing a rotating globe as if seen from the moon, accompanied by the moon as if seen from the earth, and it covers a period of 1 month. We'll go and have a look at the actual video in a second, but first let's see what kind of rhetoric was posted with this tweet under the hashtag Flat Earth. And yet impaired imbeciles with a single-digit IQ and that need adult supervision to tie their own shoelaces still claim the Flat Earth BS. So that's a display of kind of superiority complex, Dunning Kruger, and a whole other kind of psychological labels that you could apply to someone who is thoroughly indoctrinated into a cult, but also feels the need to put him or herself on a pedestal and trash those of us that are questioning that belief, because of course they feel that they are under an attack. It's a belief that they hold personally, and so this is understandable. But it doesn't make me angry. It just makes me sad that we are in this kind of state where people do not have the ability to discern between reality and models like the one we are presented with here. And of course, this has been posted as a proof of this person's belief. So let's go and have a look at what we are being shown here. It's a video that was put together by a gentleman called Dr. James Donahue. And in the description, it says, Moon and Earth from the Moon, phases for April 2020 at the high time resolution, 15 minutes per frame. This is computer generated, but based on real NASA imagery, lunar topography using NASA JPL coordinates and data. So, okay, we have an admission that it's CGI, probably because that person knew that he would be pulled on it by people like myself. And so let's see what we are being shown here. Rotating globe on the left as seen from the moon, and a rotating moon, or the moon's not a rotating moon, the moon's phases as seen from the earth. And we have a top-down view of the earth and the moon being shown to us here. Now, first of all, this is something that we've never ever seen for ourselves. It is just a model, and in this heliocentric globe model we have the assumption that the moon goes around the earth just once a month, obviously because of the phases, and this is just one of many possible interpretations of what we see in the sky, because actually we see the moon going overhead in a very similar way to the way the sun goes overhead. And so it's an interpretation of what we see in the sky. It wasn't ever any discovery. Nobody ever discovered that the surface of the earth has curvature, or that there is any movement of the earth. Various experiments have been done over the years. Michelson, Mornay, and Sagnac, these all come down to interpreting Airy's failure as well. These are all still kind of open to interpretation, and people will argue for eons about it, because we're talking about thought experiments, ultimately, how you wish to interpret the data, and it comes down to concepts such as relativity and special relativity, and we still never are able to know for sure what is actually moving. Anyway, for the heliocentric model, the way I see it is that the globe, of course, was assumed to be another planet. This was one of the main assumptions made for the Copernican model. No new discoveries were made for the Copernican model. The movements of the luminaries had all been tracked and recorded for millennia before then. And so Copernicus just used that information and, of course, some mathematical elements of geometry to come up with this new model, which, of course, is centered on the sun. So when you have the sun assumed to be fixed, and that is at the center of your model, then of course the only way that you can have day and night on the Earth is to turn it into a rotating sphere, as we see here, as opposed to the geocentric model where the Earth is stationary and level, and or the zetetic models where the sun and the moon are rotating above the level Earth to create day and night. And of course they are much closer to the Earth than is perceived in the heliocentric model. And again, with that heliocentric model, we have assumptions and no measurements about the distance and the size of the sun. Even though we see the sun and the moon appear to be the same size in the sky to us, for the model, you have to assume that the sun is much larger and further away. And so these are all just assumptions. And of course, it's taken several hundred years for this model to be solidified, not by doing any actual scientific measurements, but just by hashing out explanations that would appear to fit what we see. So, of course, we have have people believing that this is a working model, but all it really is another way of illustrating how to tell the time. That's what all of these models are about. It's what we are doing when we look up at the sky and we see the sun and the moon and the stars at certain times and locations throughout the year. And so before the Copernican model, most of Europe and the rest of the world was following a lunar calendar. And in most of Asia, they still follow a lunar calendar, but have adopted the Gregorian calendar. So it's interesting that the Gregorian calendar and the heliocentric model were introduced as a concept at around the same time. They were just a few years apart. And this was also at a time when the printing press was coming out. So public consensus had to be formed and changed to adopt this model to represent the Gregorian calendar. And that's all this is. It is not a reality. Of course, it's been passed off as science because mathematical descriptions are used in the same way that mathematical descriptions are used to describe physical phenomena. But this isn't a physical reality. Again, no curvature was ever discovered, nothing like that would be the prerequisite for any assumptions or theories that we live on the outside of a spinning ball. The globe is simply a requirement. It is a necessity of the heliocentric model to justify night and day, and then everything else had to come from that. It is just one of many possible ways of illustrating the passage of time. So I've talked about that a lot and the video's gone through, but what I wanted to point out here was the lack of discernment and lack of investigation we have from those who believe that they live on a globe and will argue with so-called flat earthers. Now, again, for most of us, we don't really think about it. It's taught to us at a very, very early age, and it's a concept that we have to adopt. And it's not until we start really looking at the evidence that we realize that we were indoctrinated into this belief system, and the evidence we were given for it is complete trash. And here what we have is not one single real photograph. This is one of the things that you realize when you start investigating the evidence and we see that there has never ever been a single photograph of the Earth from space. And although this person admits that he's using CGI, you'd have thought he would be able to start off with some real photographs of the Earth. Getting photographs of the moon isn't too difficult, but what we have here is imagery that is probably familiar to you. I'm sure I've seen it elsewhere. We have these continents that are all a uniform color. There's no diversity here. And I'd like you to notice this cloud formation here over southern Africa. And what you'll see is that it comes round again over the ocean here. So that's obvious that these clouds have just been copy-pasted onto this imagery. So there's nothing real there. And of course we can see that the countries and the continents are not real. I mean, Australia is all one color there. This is simply not a representation of reality. So there is not one single image or piece of real footage here. And as we watch this rotate, you'll see that the cloud formations don't change at all. And there is nothing to indicate that this has any basis in reality. But of course, this is what that poster on Twitter used as their proof. And this is as much as we've got. This is all the proof any person who believes they live on a globe has. They have to appeal to authority. And even though we've had decades of so-called space exploration, and it has cost the taxpayer trillions and trillions of dollars, we have been given only fakery in return. No real images of the Earth in space. Of course, we've never even seen a picture of the Earth with a background of stars or the other planets that you would assume would be possible given the technology. Excuses of camera exposure are idiotic. And considering that we can look up from Earth into the sky and we can see millions of stars and we can see several planets all in the space of one night, it should be possible to have a satellite out there that is giving us a 24-hour footage of a rotating Earth hanging there in space with the planets coming around and a starry background. In fact, it would be a wonderful PR campaign, or you could have big corporations sponsoring the footage of a satellite that's just out there in space, as is claimed to be happening with the satellites, the Himawari satellite, and this imagery seems to be quite similar to that. And if you look at that Himawari satellite imagery, you'll see that it's again fake, just as we see with the nighttime scenes here. What you'll never have is any difference in those lights. Apparently we've got a globe that never has power cuts, and it's just obvious when you look at it and scrutinize the evidence that we are being presented with things that have just been made up, and nothing that actually reflects reality. So that's what I wanted to point out, really. We have an attachment to one of many possible models and imagery that has to be faked, as well as all the other so-called space exploration footage we see of people in the ISS. And again, if you look at that with an open mind, you see and understand that it has to be faked because it's not real. And so then you have to re-examine your beliefs, and that does take some courage. It is frightening to realize that you have been duped, and of course a lot of the time the ego will kick in and not allow us to have that realization, or allow that realization to take over. And then again, we have this insistence for alternative models. Well, again, all these models all of them are just a way of interpreting the passage of time. And so nothing changes as far as what we see going on in the sky. But what does change is the understanding that what we have believed is just an interpretation. And those interpretations are based on a bunch of assumptions and explanations that have been cobbled together, not with any scientific evidence, but simply because they had to find a way to explain what would otherwise be physically impossible, to stick to the outside of a rotating globe. And then we have ideas about tilt and things like that, all of which can be explained in a zetetic or geocentric model. But again, none of us can actually say what is the truth, because it's obvious that no one can get far enough away from the Earth to see it in its entirety, and our exploration of the Earth is very limited, and we are confined to what we know. Sure, we can travel to different countries and people can navigate, and all we see when it comes to navigation is a conversion of perspective into an imaginary curve. Celestial navigation relies on making observations of the sun and using geometry, and it's done on a level Earth, but the projections can be made into a spherical Earth because geometry is used to describe perspective. So I hope that helps. What I'm trying to explain here is to clarify the difference between models and reality. Reality is what we experience, whether it's flowing water or air pressure or aircraft flying above a level stationary Earth that doesn't rotate beneath them, and all of these things that we see and do in reality that have no bearing and would never ever lead us to believe that we live on the outside of a spinning globe. The only reason we believe it is because we have a model that has been pushed upon us, and consensus has been created. So consensus isn't a fact, and especially when the imagery that we are given tells us that only trickery is used to confirm this so-called fact, or the consensus. And as we know, the Gregorian calendar is now used worldwide, and it's simply a commercial way of keeping time, and it works as far as that commercial entity goes, but to try and illustrate that means we end up with something that does not represent reality. So the difference here is we've got models, and we've got one particular model that is possible out of many possible models, but then we have reality. And the reality is we are not living on a globe. It's obvious. Thank you very much. Click subscribe and the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of new videos from Phuket Word.